who didn't go on to college, who didn't, yeah.
You need to sneak in here?
Really, a continuation for
Yeah, I
I
can.
think that being
It's a good start.
Yeah, we'll sneak him to the left. And I can sneak to the right. That's sufficient. So, CBS, you don't watch CBS anymore. Sure, right? You guys slide this too?
Check, check, check. Sibilance, sibilance. Mic check. Sibilance. Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Check, check, check. That good, Ed? Check, check, check. Mic check 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Awesome. Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Good morning, everyone. We're about to get started here. If you want to take your seats and make yourself at home. Anywhere. Alrighty, good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? Thank y'all so much for joining us. My name is Gary Cooper. I'm the president of the San Antonio Association of Hispanic Journalists. It's so great to be here with y'all. So great to talk about arguably one of the biggest concerns, if you will, regarding this election cycle. Want to give a big thanks to our panelists who have joined us, who sacrificed their Saturday morning as well to join us. So thank y'all so much. Round of applause to them. For those who don't know, the San Antonio Association of Hispanic Journalists, or SAHJ for short, we are a nonprofit our sole mission is to promote diversity in our newsrooms and in as many facets of communication as possible here in San Antonio and in South and Central Texas. Not to humble brag, but this year we awarded our most amount of money in terms of scholarship ever, $40,000, thanks to our generous sponsors and donors. And with any luck, we can continue that trend. Before we get started, I want to say a few thank yous. First and foremost, we're working with the Society of Professional Journalists, the San Antonio chapter, and they're represented here. Mr. Michael Drudge is here. As promised, SPJ is known for their annual Gridiron Show. It's essentially a spoof of the big news events within the last year. Think of it as a San Antonio rendition of SNL, for lack of a better term. It's on October 1st at McAllister Auditorium. Tickets are still available, and trust me, it is funny, somewhat crude, but certainly worthwhile, and all proceeds benefit their scholarship fund as well. So there's more. Some posters outside if you want to pick one up on the way out. Just like this one. This event could not have happened without the hard work of our board, and where are our board members? Current and former board members. That's you guys. If you want to stand up. Tip of the hat to Mr. Tony Quesada from the San Antonio Business Journal. He spearheaded putting this thing together. He could not join us this morning, but Tony, wherever you are, huge thanks for putting this thing together and working your tail off to make it happen. Thank you, sir. Huge thanks to the University of the Incarnate Word for letting us use their facilities for this event. So a round of applause for UIW for providing us a wonderful room. And if you want to spread the good word, we're actually live streaming this event courtesy of LCTV and Chem Means What. They're right back there. If you guys want to wave. Ed, you too. Thank you, sir. We are live on the internet right now, so look for the hashtag. What was the hashtag again? Latino Vote, hashtag Latino Vote, and also hashtag SAAHJ as well, and hashtag SPJ as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to our Vice President, Joey Palacios, for a bit of information as to why we're all here. Joey.
All right, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Joey Palacios. I'm a reporter with Texas Public Radio and Vice President of the San Antonio Association of Hispanic Journalists. We are here to talk about Latino voting issues. Latinos are becoming a huge demographic in the United States, and more so in the state of Texas. It's been predicted that Latinos could be the majority probably within this century or become close to it. We would like to speak to some of the folks who are affected by the Latino vote, or some of our elected officials here and those who teach us about Hispanics here in Texas and in the country. So let's go ahead and introduce some of our panelists. We have Robert Stovall, who is the chairman of the Bexar County Republican Party. We have Gilberto Hinojosa, who is a professor here at UIW, who examines social, economic, and cultural dynamics of information from Mexican-American communities. Congressman Henry Cuellar, whose district includes parts of San Antonio. State Representative Diego Bernal, and I believe your district is wholly in San Antonio, isn't it? Okay. Former Congressman Pete Gallego, who is running for the 23rd Congressional District, which is one of the largest districts in Texas. Goes from here, starts on the west side of San Antonio, if I'm not mistaken, and then goes all the way towards El Paso. And then, of course, we have Lydia Camarillo, who is Vice President of the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project.
A few ground rules before we begin. No campaigning. Please play nice with one another and try not to talk over each other. I say that with all due respect to everyone involved. Alrighty, let's get this thing going. Okay, so first question. According to the Pew Research Center, there are 27.3 million eligible Hispanic voters in this country right now, give or take. About half of them, 44%, correct, are millennials. It seems like millennial Hispanics will be a massive driving force this election cycle, and I'm looking at Lydia for this question to start off. From your line of work, is that the trend? Are younger Hispanics more engaged in this election cycle?
Well, first of all, good morning y gracias por la invitación. Thank you to the the San Antonio Latino Journalist Association. Thank you for this invitation. Yes, the Latino electorate is a good portion of the Latino electorate are millennials. In fact, when you think about the Latino electorate, think of it this way. The median age of a white voter is 39 years old. The median age of a Latino voter is 22 years old. 22 years old. And what we know about millennials is that they're smart, they're engaged, they care about their community, but they're also doing what most of us have to do once we become adults. Work, sustain our families, and as we all know, unlike when I was a millennial, we weren't called that yet, of course, but when I was 22 years old, if I wanted to go live on my own, there could find my girlfriends, 4 of us, and it would cost, what, $50 for each one of us to rent a nice house? That's not the case. So what we know about Latino millennials are 2 things. More than likely, they're not in college. They're more than likely have young children. They're probably still living at home with their parents, and mom probably has her mom living at home, so it's 3 generations. So they care. We also know the second thing in Texas, that because of the systematic barriers and the registration deadline, which is 30 days out versus same day as election day or 7 days out, when people start paying attention to the elections, it's 2 weeks out, that they may have not had the opportunity to register to vote, so it's not that they care. We also know that in a presidential cycle, when at the top of the ticket, it's an open seat, it's competitive, you've got 2 very distinct campaigns, And there's 4 candidates that are looking quite interesting. Of course, the 2 majority parties are the Democrats and the Republicans. But when you have at the top of the ticket in a presidential general election, you can expect the millennials will turn out in record number, and Latinos will not be any different. We're expecting that out of the 27 million eligible to vote, 15 million Latinos will be registered to vote nationwide, and anywhere from 82 to 84% of those that are registered will cast a vote. And for the first time in our history in Texas, we expect that 2 million Latinos will vote this cycle, which means we will break all records. Last point. Over the last 4 years, that's how we measure Latino registration and Latino turnout. Since we have been recording voter registration and turnout, Latinos have grown every 4 cycles by 2 more million registered voters and 1 million more Latinos votes cast. In 2000, just to give you a comparison, the national turnout was about 5 percentage points nationwide. It was 10% the last cycle on election day, but overall 9 percentage points, which makes you wonder whether you think or not the Latino vote matters. It matters because it's decided, the elections are decided by the electoral votes. And in competitive states, like Florida, Latino electorate will make about 18 to 19% of the share of the vote. In Arizona, which is trending, notice how I said trending, competitive, the Latino electorate, the last cycle in 2012 was about 17% of the share of the vote. And because of what I'm calling the Arpaio factor, it is now going to be 25% of the share of the vote. So I know you have other questions, so I can talk on forever. So gracias.
So before we move on, Lizzie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization?
Southwest Voter Registration Education Project is an organization that was started by the late William C. Velasquez here in San Antonio, in the heart of San Antonio, in the west side to be exact. And since we opened our doors 42 years ago, Southwest Voter has registered 2.6 million Latinos, trained 150,000 Latino leaders, and 189 voting rights lawsuits. We currently have 3 lawsuits pending. The redistricting one, which we sued the state of Texas on redistricting, the voter ID, and in the state of Arizona, we won before the Supreme Court on phase 1, and now I call it phase 2, which is Proposition 200 passed in 2004, which required that if you wanted to register to vote, you must also have a copy of your birth certificate. And for third-party groups, that wasn't going to work, and nor is it going to work for folks providing their birth certificate. So we filed a lawsuit. We went before the Supreme Court. I testified before the Washington federal court, and the court, in fact, said it was unconstitutional and it diluted the vote. The court then made a decision. We all know that electoral decisions are made by states, and so they said, yes, Arizona can make that requirement. So if you want to keep it, then you can register to vote in an Arizona form. But the federal form does not require that. Therefore, you can register in a federal form with using the federal form. We won. Then Arizona says, you want to do that? Guess what? You can only vote in federal elections, not state or local elections. So we're back again in court, and I assume we've lost in the first 2 rounds. I assume we're going to be back very shortly again before the Supreme Court, and that's ongoing. On the congressional district, the 23rd is the most competitive district in the state of Texas, and in fact, it's one of considered the most competitive of the 12 to 18 nationwide. When redistricting took place in the last cycle, we knew that Texas was going to gain 4 congressional seats. We testified along with other groups, MALDF and other groups, that we could create 10 possible Latino majority seats. The state of Texas drew its map. We started off with 7 Latino majority seats. They took away 1. When we gained 4 congressional seats, we sued. Now we're at 9. Thank you. That's who Southwest Voter is.
Thank you. So now we'd like to ask, again, the first question to Mr. Robert Stovall. Are younger Hispanics more engaged this time around?
Well, I have to tell you, I would agree that, yes, the younger Hispanics seem to be more engaged. As we know, my focus as chairman of Bexar County is Bexar County and the electorate. Bexar County is 63% Hispanic, And we have a good portion of that are young Hispanic voters. We have seen the trend anywhere from 3 to 4% every election cycle that the millennials do come out and vote. However, they are busy, they are in school, they're trying to get jobs, or they're working, or they're raising their families. So it's always something that we are trying to do at the Bexar County Republican Party, is reaching out to those. We have been successful. I don't know if you have seen our electorate on the House districts that we've had in 118 and 117 that have expanded, reaching out to those Hispanic voters, and particularly millennial Hispanic voters, to come out and vote, as these are important elections for them as well, to have House districts.
And so we'll take the same question over to Diego Bernal.
So, yes, the answer is yes. But I'm sort of an issue guy. I was a civil rights attorney before I was in politics, and I worked with Lydia. I was a litigator for MALDEF, and so coming from the sort of voter access side and now being on the receiving end of votes, my take is yes, millennials are more, I don't know if they're more engaged. I mean, they are, but I think they're more interested. The missing piece for millennials, which I think connects them to the generations before them, is that they're also, even more so, I think because of social media and other media outlets, they're more interested in results. They're more interested in deliverables. They like to see their votes become something. In other words, I think for millennials, electing the right person is sort of half of their interest. And the other half is what that person does with that vote. What policies are put in place? What things can they deliver? How is the world different, whether it's 2 years or 4 years after that vote? That, I think, is interesting about them, because they're waiting for something to come down the pipe after that vote and say, this is what you've got for doing it. I think for them, what's sort of really interesting and a little bit scary is, I think for them, in my experience, it's actually easier to get them to vote once and more challenging to get them to vote again, because they want to see what happens with that vote. So on my end, my perch, my vantage point is, it falls completely in line with what everyone said, but my experience has been in dealing with them and having them talk to me. I say them because I turned 40 in a month, so I can't count myself as one of them. But they're much more demanding. They want to know what you did with it, and not just that you think the same that they do, or you share the same values, but they really want to know what you did. And I find that to be very, very different.
Would any of our other panelists like to comment on that?
Well, one of the things that happens with the Latino Hispanic population as a whole, we can apply also to millennials, and that is the tendency is to think that the population is homogeneic, that is homogeneous population, that everyone is at the same level of interest, or so historians look at things like economic status and economic interests, and also in relationship to an immigrant group, to acculturation. And the question would be, are all these millennials coming from multi-generational American families, or are they from new immigrant families? So the question, the reason I'm bringing this up is that there might not be any single issue that attracts this group. And I myself think, for example, that the immigration issue of on the national level is a good one, but the issue is whether or not it interests the whole group. It may interest one section of the group more than the others. And so I think for millennials, and I may be wrong about this, is that one possible common issue would be education, as well as minimum wage and the availability of jobs. So I'm not sure if those are the issues. I think the elected or people in politics would be closer to that.
Thank you very much. Let me just add a little bit to what some of the folks have just added. 27.3 million Latinos are eligible to vote in 2016, out of 57 million Hispanics that we have in the United States. The numbers, eligible numbers, as you know, when we look at that, we look at total population, who's eligible, but then the turnout rate is important. When you look at the turnout rate for the last presidential election, blacks had a 66.6% turnout. Whites had a 64.1 turnout, and Hispanics had a 48% turnout rate. So imagine if we went from a 48 Hispanics, from a 48 to a, let's say, where the blacks are at 66.6, then you're talking about, Lydia, large numbers of folks that will be coming out. The millennials, Hispanics, make about 44% of the Hispanic electorate. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that it's estimated that for the next 2 decades, 50,000 Hispanics per month will turn 18. 50,000 Hispanics every month will turn 18 and become eligible to be registered to vote. Huge numbers, but notice what I said at the very beginning. You have total population, who's registered, and who turns out to vote. The other thing is, here in Texas, if you look at it, and Hispanic turnout in 2012 was 48%. And in 2008, it was 50%. So we actually went down from the last presidential in 2008 to 2012 itself. Now, one of the things, if you look at Hispanics usually support Democrats. I'm not getting political. I'm just giving you some facts. Support Hispanics 2-1. Support Democrats 2-1. But the younger Hispanics are going to be are more likely to identify themselves to be independent than the older Hispanics. Keep that in mind. Your father, your mother might be different from your brother and sister. Independent, which means that Republicans and Democrats are now have to jump ball and not say automatically that that the younger Hispanics are going to be voting Democratic. And the other thing is, and I, as a Democrat, and I've always said this, that sometimes the national parties, both sides, have a way of stereotyping Hispanics. And if you look at it, right now, the Gallup poll shows that 51% of Hispanics indicate themselves to be Democrats, and then some Republicans, and then independents. But 54% of the Hispanics identify themselves to be conservative individuals. So again, we say this because a lot of times at the national level, and I say this, don't want to say at the state because I haven't been there for a while, but I used to see that at the state also. But at the national, we see both parties. You have the Republican Party that's some, not all. I mean, you got folks like John Cornyn that do a good job working with Hispanics. George Bush did that also. But generally, you have some folks that attack Hispanics, building walls, doing this, calling rapists and murders and all that. And then you have Democrats, the Democratic Party, that automatically think that every Hispanic is a liberal Democrat, and that's the only peg that you are going to see Democrat. I think both parties are wrong. And especially what you said a while ago, Professor, is they usually think, for example, both sides think that the number one issue is immigration. Immigration is important. I support full immigration reform, but if you look at it, recent polls, and I've done this every time I poll my district, it's usually the same. It's the economy, it's healthcare, it's education. They might flip around. Then you might have an issue that comes in. At one time, it was crime that came in. Now it's terrorism because of what we're seeing. So right now, the latest poll shows the economy number 1, healthcare number 2, terrorism number 3, education number 4, immigration number 5. But it's usually education, healthcare, the economy, which are the top ones. But if you look at the national parties, what do they say? It's immigration, immigration. I think both parties get it wrong when they come in. And I'll finally say this thing about border security. On one side, you have one party that says, we're going to put a wall, we're going to do this and all this. Then on the other side, you have another party that wants to have open borders. I live on the border. I represent, from here, I represent 160,000 individuals here in San Antonio, go all the way to Laredo. My hometown, go all the way down to Hidalgo. I consider myself a law and order Democrat. I don't want to see chaos on the border, but at the same time, I don't want to see militarization of the border itself. So we have to find that balance. And sometimes both parties, the fringes of both parties, have a way of just not understanding how the Hispanics are not a monolithic group, but a very diverse group, and especially with the millenniums that are coming in that are going to be very different from my moms and our moms and fathers that are going to be more independent than the older Hispanics.
Mr. Gallego?
Well, I am not an open borders guy because I, too, at one point represented a lot of the border. But I will tell you this about the millennial population, which I think is a great thing when we have competition. It tends to make people work for your vote. And any time that somebody's working to earn the Latino community's vote, that's a great thing. But the interesting thing about Latinos of today, particularly the younger Latinos, the millennial population that we're talking about, is they are not motivated as much by the social issues that some of the parties have fought for so long. Many of those conversations have been had, and for the most part, younger people are over all of that. And they want to know, what are you going to do for me now? What are you going to do for my future? What are you going to do for my kids' future? As opposed to the social issues that have gotten society so wrapped up over the course of the political debate for years. So the interesting thing is, I think Mr. Cuellar is right in that the topics need to change, right? Because you're going to have to tailor your argument now to this fairly new audience. I think Professor Hinojosa is right. I mean, there's a huge difference in opinions between families who have just gotten here and families who have been here for generations. Those opinions are not necessarily aligned. I mean, I think you saw that, at least I did, in the data and the people that I was talking to. When you saw Mr. Trump, for example, when he said his initial comment when he talked about murderers and rapists, a lot of the Latino community said, well, he's not really talking about us. He's talking about the folks that just got here. And over the course of time, as Mr. Trump continued his conversation, and he got to a point where he talked about a federal judge, right, whose parents had been from Mexico and who was now, had been born and raised in Indiana and was now a federal judge, and actually said, it's because of his heritage, he's Mexican, I want to build a wall with Mexico. At that point, the Latino community stands up and says, oh wait, he's talking about a lot of us, he's talking about all of us. And that was a seminal moment, I think, in that conversation, because there is a huge difference of opinion, and it's a life experience issue for most people who feel more integrated into the society, whether it's in Texas or in other states. But it is definitely a good thing when the Latino community feels like the vote has to be earned. And it makes you go out and talk to not only the Latino community, but all communities of color about what's important to them, how they see their future, and what's important to them. And those conversations, I think, are key if we really want to make our country stronger and we want to make it whole again.
Alrighty, thank you all so much. Second question we'll start with Professor Hinojosa on this one. Opinions are seemingly running at an all-time high this election cycle. Are third-party candidates a viable option for Hispanics, and are they doing enough to court the Hispanic vote? And do you see from your end, the Republican and Democratic parties, do they feel that a third party option, is that a viable concern?
Well, the issue of going through a third party, whether a group says we want certain things, and we look back and say, well, what party can deliver these matters? At some point without going back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, or to Adam and Eve a little further back, you know, But if we were to look back at the experience in the 1970s, which for some of you, many of you, is your parents' generation, many Mexican Americans in Texas and across the Southwest opted for a third-party option, and that it was La Raza Unida Party. And the issues were very clear of segregation, discrimination, and so it had some viability, limited, some possibilities to it, not liability, but possibilities. And it was lively enough to earn the possibility of being on the ticket, the second gubernatorial race without collecting signatures, and then it fizzled away. So the issue is what party can deliver the things that we want. There's a famous story of that Willie Velasquez said. We used to tell about a town in West, I think it was South Texas or West Texas, was trying to get people to vote, register and vote. And this older man, I hesitate to talk about older men, but anyway, he said, look, I voted for Kennedy, but the light here in my street corner, it hasn't gotten fixed. And so the issue is, what party can deliver the issues that I'm concerned with. Some voting in South Texas, San Antonio in particular, has been very effective without going through political parties that dealt with local issues. Some of the most successful campaigns have been on local issues handled by a nonpartisan group, Communities Organized for Public Services. They succeeded in delivering what the community needed. Every time it rained, my house got flooded. Why don't we fix the creek system here in San Antonio and the drainage system through the streets, which have become creeks, and so on, and it worked. So somebody took an issue that meant something to people, and they delivered through a nonpartisan vehicle. Now, the issue of a third party, becomes problematic because they don't see the possibility of delivering that. And it didn't work with Raza Unida. I don't think it's seen as an option for national issues or even for local issues. Even though some local issues are related to the environment are critical and so on, you would think that the Green Party would have a bigger power in the state because this, and yet, again, they're not seeing those environmental issues, however important they might be, are not seen as vital as, do my children have jobs? Well, how much do they pay? Or do they have an opportunity to go to school? And so in the funding of the grade school level is just terrible. We heard recently, speaking in related to the San Antonio Independent School District at a conversation I think you were at, where the neighborhood around some of the high schools in San Antonio have a average earning of $20,000 and $30,000 a year, and cannot support the kind of education that takes place elsewhere in the city of San Antonio, let alone elsewhere in the city of Texas. Now, who can deliver these things that mean something to me? I don't think the third party is going to be an option.
Anybody else?
Well, this is a really good question. I just want to tell you that in any of our lifetimes here, that a third party has not been a viable option for the top of the ticket candidate. However, that being said, as we know that a lot of the millennials, and you can look at the Hispanic vote inside of those millennial votes as well, have not been trending towards the Democrat Party, breaking off of Hillary's campaign, and I'm talking about the Bernie Sanders voters. So that being said, in that trend where those millennial voters are going to, if they do, and they are going to vote, we do realize that they're going to go to the ballot, and they decide on a third party option. The challenge is for us as a local party is to hopefully focus them on some of the other down ballot races that we have, and where we have the opportunity to focus them on our candidates and the Republican candidates. And that will be my focus. I do not think that it is a viable spot, but when you go down the ballot, especially here in Bexar County, we have 27 other races. There are not Libertarian or Green Party candidates in there. So where are those voters going to go? We look at that as an opportunity for us to focus them on our candidates, what our individual candidates and those issues can bring to them, and then hopefully in future races, as they start looking at these options, that they will vote for other Republicans going down the ballot in future elections.
Well, basically, the reason you have the rise of third parties is simply because the folks, the electorate is not happy with the two main parties. They're not happy with the Democrat Party. They're not happy with the Republican Party. So some folks feel that they need to look at another option, whether it's a Libertarian or Green Party. And this is why, as a Democrat, I always say, hey, we got to make sure that as Democrats, and I'm sure that you say the same thing about Republicans, that we restructure our party to be responsive to the needs of the folks. In Washington, as an example, I try to be on a dual process, a dual track. One track is we got to deal with the national issues that come up, but the international issues, whether it's unaccompanied kids are coming in, Central America, Russia, Syria, ISIS, radical Islam, whatever the case might be, we need to address those issues. But at the same time, the second part that I always look at is the second track I'm on is I run like if I'm a mayor. What does that mean? Is I try to produce the things that are important to Floresville, to San Antonio, Converse or Laredo, whatever, or Zapata, the small area. What's important? A lot of times the issues that we talk at the national area, people are not interested. They want to know, hey, we got a water system here that's not working. We got this other road that we need to get here. And this is what I mean by running as a mayor to produce. I sit in the appropriation. I'm the only Democrat in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona for this region. And I work with 3 Republicans that are in appropriations from Texas. We work very well, and we get things done. Let me give you, talking about Hispanics, so we can go back to this. On Hispanics, for example, one of the things I did in the appropriations that I went down there on the appropriation, every single appropriation, and I put language there that say Hispanic serving institutions like Incarnate Word, like UTSA, Laredo, Texas A&M, the other universities we have, will be able to get help from every agency. So I went down every agency appropriation, say, you will be working with Hispanic serving institutions to help Hispanics. National Science Foundation, for many years, they have a set aside for historically black universities, but for some reason, they won't establish. And I sat down with the director, I said, why can't you do it? Well, this and that. I said, I don't understand, why can't we set aside $30 million for Hispanic serving institutions? So they came up, I know, for Aku and other folks, this was a very important issue. So finally, after not trying to, couldn't convince them, I just said, well, you're going to establish, and we put that language in there. So we look at those things. Another example of being a judge, people talk about walls, borders, Border Patrol and other things, about border security. What I looked at is an area that a lot of people don't look at. For example, the court system here in San Antonio, working with Cornyn, on the Senate side, myself in the appropriations, we were able to get $135+ million for a new courthouse here. Immigration judges. Last year, I added 55 new immigration judges, largest amount of judges that we've ever had. This year, I was going to add another 55, but the administration didn't want any. I couldn't understand, but I was able to sit down with my Republican colleague, John Colson. We added 25 new judges. So you add the 55, 25. Those judges are important. Why home here? Because there's about 500,000 cases and backlog for people that are waiting to see their asylum case or their credible case or whatever the case might be so they can get their day in court. So at the national level, as a Democrat, there are issues that we have to look at, national and international. One track. The other track is running as a mayor to address the issues that are important, which is what you said is deliverables, and you work hard, you produce results, real results, and people are going to appreciate the work that you do.
So I'm just going to reiterate a certain point. One, I wanted to note how many people here are talking about deliverables. How many people here talking about your vote becoming something, and then not just electing someone that you like, but that person going and doing something that you can feel and touch and experience? That seems to be what people want. The question about a third party, I think, assumes a level of dissatisfaction. You're right. I'm just saying that the reason why a third party is even an option, why it's even part of the conversation, is an acknowledgement that people aren't happy with what they've got right now. And to some degree, I share that, because I think that a lot of national issues are local issues. They just aren't talked about. And as we were talking about earlier, one of the things that I care very, very much about is public education. And I think a lot of Latinos, whether they're recent immigrants or they've been here for many years, education is sort of a cornerstone of their belief system, that that is a pathway to success and economic opportunity. It's a pathway to good jobs. And yet, in this election, let's talk about the three major candidates we've had: Bernie, Hillary, and Trump. Who's talked about public ed at all? Not even a little bit. And so, if that's your number one issue, that's something you care about, and not a dog whistle like, you know, vouchers. I'm talking about really reforming, making things better. Public education is one of those things where you can go to any neighborhood in this city, look at the neighborhood and look at the school and see how much they coincide. And then you go to another part of town, you look at the neighborhood and the school, and it's so obvious. And yet, for some reason, no one's talking about it. So that level of dissatisfaction, that level of anger and angst and frustration, I think, is what leads people to consider third parties, because they're looking for things to change, they're looking for things to get better, looking for things to evolve. And it's not that, in some cases, you might have people who care about it very much and are plugging away at it, and it's very hard to make progress. But in another instance, a more obvious and public instance, you've got an entire campaign that's been going on for about a year, and it hasn't been discussed at length at all. And so I think that level of dismissiveness is what leads to people to consider third parties. And so whatever side you're on, you know, we're getting called out, and we have to change that.
What about college education? Now, that has come up.
So this is my own
A little bit.
This is my own perspective. Right. It has come up a little bit. I think that Bernie Sanders brought up college a bit, but you know, I represent the inner city of San Antonio, right? And so the idea that the biggest issue in education are the ones facing people who are already finished with college doesn't resonate as much as the one for people who are in schools that they want to get better, that they want to see better, and they can compare and contrast those schools in their neighborhoods to the ones just 2 or 3 miles away. Not that that issue is not important, but it's not as immediate, because if the biggest problem in your life is the debt that you've accumulated after you're done with college, you're in a very different place, and that is a very different series of problems than those people who have someone in the 3rd grade or the 4th grade who want to make sure that they get a decent education, get out of school, and then have options. It's just the immediacy is different.
What about millennials wanting to complete their college education and not leave with that debt? I thought that maybe for them, this issue may work a little bit.
Sure.
You know, as you said, it's been relatively quiet in comparison to other issues.
I think in many ways that's what drew a lot of them to Bernie. But my point is that even if we acknowledge that part, even if we acknowledge that moment, it is half of the conversation about education. And yet you've got someone who brought it to the forefront who's not running anymore, right? So he's not running anymore, and then with the last two, that part isn't getting the same play it used to, much less the pre-K through 12.
Well, I agree that there's clearly a focus on deliverables, and but let me go at this in 2 ways. I think people, and I think this applies not only to Latino millennials, but I think it applies to everybody across the board. I think everybody's tired of the extreme partisanship and nothing ever getting fixed, nothing ever getting done. But I don't think that's just Latinos. You know, I will tell you, if Latinos are the fastest growing population, that means we're having kids. And we're having kids, a lot of kids, right? And I can tell you that I have one, but when Marlena was pregnant, wow, I didn't want her to pick up a grocery bag. I didn't want her to mop floors. I mean, I was worried. She was worried. It was a very special time in our lives. Right? But right now, one mosquito bite can change your life. One mosquito bite can change your kid's life forever. And yet, the fight over whether or not to fix Zika got caught up in, there's an amendment that says, well, we want to be able to fly the Confederate flag at military cemeteries. And unless you agree to fly the flag at military cemeteries, we're not going to fix Zika. Okay. And then there's the fight about, oh, well, unless you agree to zero fund Planned Parenthood, we're not going to have a Zika bill. And in the meantime, you have all of these women. I mean, I've talked to people, you know, I talked to a woman who left, who moved to the north where it would be colder and there wouldn't be mosquitoes. But really, in our community, how many people can do that? How many people can move when they're pregnant, right? And so the idea of just fixing it, just fix it. That's something that everybody buys into, and that's why people are so tired. But I will also tell you this. My experience in political parties is not too different from my experience in families. You're never going to agree 100% of the time. You're never going to find 100% agreement with your political party. But you have to have a level of comfort, right? I mean, if you've ever been invited to somebody's house and they make you feel at home and you're comfortable there, and you walk in and you feel good, and then by the same token, you've probably been to somebody's house where you feel like maybe you're in a museum or you're not as comfortable, there's a level of awkwardness there, right? That's how I feel about political parties. Do you have to agree 100% of the time? No. But there has to be some level of comfort. And clearly, the parties have to re-message and re-engineer what they're doing to give people, especially millennials, a better level of comfort. I don't think the millennials are any different from my parents' generation or my grandparents' generation. They were Democrats, but they were Democrats because they felt the party delivered. I mean, if you look, I grew up, you know, as I look across, there's probably not, you know, there's fewer and fewer of us every year, but I grew up in a very segregated community where the schools were segregated. And when the Civil Rights Act came, that was a huge, huge, huge thing for people. And you looked at, okay, Barry Goldwater, who was running against Lyndon Johnson, right? Barry Goldwater, who had opposed the Civil Rights Act, versus Lyndon Johnson, who had helped pass it. And so that was a deliverable for them. So even then, that loyalty that has built up, I don't know, I think it was built up because people felt that a particular party was doing something for them, and they were gaining. And I think both parties, and again, I think it's good that both parties are going to work for the Latino community. It's a burgeoning community. And I think it says good things that, you know, I mean, as a kid growing up in Alpine, I wanted my vote to be important. And now I feel like I've won the lottery, right? Because now the Latino community, we know those votes are important. And now it's just a challenge of getting those votes out.
Let me see. I think there was a question in particular.
Yeah, it was about third parties.
Let me start by saying, first of all, that at Southwest Voter we believe that if we were similar and we played politics like most countries, there'd be a lot of parties and more people would be engaged. First. Second, there are right now, obviously, the Republicans and the Democrat Party, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are the controlling parties. And the question has become, will this election determine the outcome of who's going to win the 270 plus electoral votes to win if the Libertarian or the Green Party candidates that are playing are going to play ball? In some states, like the blue states, in California, Illinois, and New York, or even the red states in Texas, Oklahoma, some of the solid Republican states, there's going to be some folks who are going to definitely vote for the third party of their choice. The question becomes, will they vote in the competitive states where that election will matter? And let me tell you, President Clinton became president because of parole. And there is no doubt about that. He didn't win simply because he won because parole was a third party. And whether you agree with or disagree with what happened in Florida in 2000 with there goes my accent. Thank you. The butterfly buzz, because there goes my accent. Whether you agree with that or not, there were 150,000 people that voted in Florida for Nader. And this election is going to be very, very tight. The whole conversation about the issues is tailored to the white swing vote by the two major parties. So that's why they're not talking about education, that's why they're not talking about the issues. They're talking about issues that older white America cares about, because that's the swing vote. Now, that's not to say that I agree with them, that's just what's going on. And so when we're looking at issues that matter to the Latino community, they're not talking about that. They're talking about health care. I don't know about you, but if we just said that the good portion of the Latino electorate is a millennial, trust me, at 22, we weren't thinking about health care. We thought we were invincible, or at least I thought it was invincible at 22, so do my children. So, and education is not also an issue that they're discussing. So, but millennials care about the environment. The environment is a key issue for them that they are very, very concerned. And the Latino electorate votes at 83% or better if there's a ballot that has to do, or a bond that has to do with building schools, cleaning the air, cleaning the water. You see that in places where that's clear. This election cycle, Colorado and Arizona have two important initiatives that have to do with wages, and that will help to drive out the Latino vote. In Florida and California, a blue state and a purple state, which Florida and Ohio are still the key states for this election, is going to be also the issue of marijuana. And so those issues are also key issues that are important. But at the end of the day, right now, I think this election is going to be the most interesting, where perhaps the winner, in this case, I still believe, given the polls, that Clinton will win, that she will win the electoral votes, and it will be New Hampshire, which is white America deciding. So that's part of what they're looking at. Now, let me not say, and let me suggest that the Latino electorate is key in the other competitive states, Colorado, Nevada, Florida, and even in Ohio and Pennsylvania, which the Latino electorate only makes about 2 to 3 percentage points depending on the state of the share of the vote. If the race is going to be very, very tight, and it will, very, very, very tight, those elections will matter. But right now, Hillary, about 3 months ago, it looked like she was going to run away with 350 electoral votes, similar to what President Obama did in the first election and the second election. Now it looks like, if best, she'll get another New Hampshire's electoral votes, and that's what carries her over. But the Republican Party is clearly solidifying its vote, clear by what Senator Cruz has just done. And the Democratic Party is still not solidifying its base because it's not investing in turning out the African American vote, and it's not investing in turning out the Latino vote. And for us at Southwest Voter, the question is the down ballot. We're close to the redistricting. In the next cycle, we expect that Texas will gain another probably 2 seats, which will make Texas 40 electoral votes, and down ballot's important. The state of Texas has an estimated 8 to 12 competitive state house seats. 107 in Dallas is one of the most important. Here in Texas is the 117 and the 118. And as I said, the congressional seat, of all the congressional seats, 12 to 18 competitive seats around the country, the 23rd is one of the most important. And those are some of the issues. There's also other issues that are very critical that nobody's paying attention to. Who's going to run our courts? Who's going to be the next sheriff? Those are the local issues that people aren't paying attention. But to the point about why they're spending more time is because right now the swing vote is white America, older America, and the Democrats are going after and need their base, and that's the young millennials for all, the white, the black, the Latino, but they're not investing in that electorate to turn out to vote. They're hoping to turn out to vote just because. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'd like to turn it over to the audience if we can, I believe we have a question from the audience. Does anybody have one?
I'll take an easy question.
Over there.
fault now.
Hi, good morning. My name is Leslie Martinez. I'm a professor here at UIW as well. I'm a product of SAISD, so I do hold all of these issues very close to my heart. I even have some students here. My question is, first of all, I'd like to thank Professor for bringing up the diversity of our vote. That's something that I always teach my classes, and I hope to educate them on that issue in particular. But my question is, so we're talking about these different ways that are we're losing trust in the political figures on each side. So what can we do both as a community and as our leaders to kind of build that trust? What have you already seen been done? And also how can the community try and help and bridge that gap, no matter what side or what party?
So why don't we go with you first?
Sure. Well, thank you for getting up and asking that question. I want to let you know that I'm on the South San Education Foundation board, and I've been on there for a couple of years, and I'm proud to do that, helping them raise money for their education programs. That being said, that I think that it's an opportunity, like I said earlier, that these millennial voters, Hispanic voters that are not necessarily trending on the way that their parents and grandparents have traditionally voted Democrat, that they keep an open mind and go down ballot and look at our candidates. Since I became chairman of the Bexar County Party, the Bexar County Republican Party pretty much stayed focused north of Hildebrand. And I remember as chairman that they asked that all our Republican votes are north of Hildebrand in Bexar County and San Antonio, and pretty much the south end of San Antonio was taken care of by the Democrats because of the amount of Hispanics that lived over there. And I said, well, I'm Hispanic. I speak Spanish. Why can't I go down there? I said, well, because, with the last name of Stovall, they're probably not going to accept you as being Hispanic. I said, it doesn't matter to me. If we don't go and we don't visit and we don't show our faces and show our candidates down there, how do they know that there's an actual option? So this is what we've been doing, and this is what I ask that across the city and across the county that people do is look at our candidates. Not all of our candidates are perfect, but part of the vetting process that we do as chairman is we look at all these candidates to make sure that they do have a qualified, they're qualified candidates so that we can show our best face on this thing. And I can't tell you how important that is to get the message out to the millennial voters, to the Hispanic millennial voters that are now coming up, that we think that we have the most opportunity to talk to and get that vote trending towards the Republican Party. It's happening in Bexar County. I think that this has been going on even since, whether you agreed with the last mayoral election or not. I think when we looked at the numbers and the statistics and all, there was an amazing thing that happened. It was like the nut cracked on that election cycle, because as we know, Letitia Van de Putte has been around a long time. She's a wonderful lady. I know her well and all that. But what happened was that traditional Democrat and Hispanic voters did not line up necessarily against a Democrat candidate. And so what happened, we ended up with Mayor Ivy Taylor. And I think this is what's trending and what is happening in Bexar County, and this is the message, and this is what we do, or my job as Republican is to say, San Antonio is a diverse city, right? We're 63% Hispanic in Bexar County. We've been electing Republicans countywide since the early 80s. So the Hispanic vote isn't necessarily lined up with the Democratic Party. We just have to make sure that we get our message out there all over the county, not just north of Hildebrand, but south of Hildebrand, and make sure that all voters, whether they're Hispanic, millennials, all the way across the board, are open to look at our down ballot candidates.
Let's go over to Diego now.
Let me just make one little comment about that and compliment some of the elected officials here, and that is that partisanship, in extreme partisanship or extreme, it's kind of hard to decide, but anyway, it's been here forever. The one president that was unanimously elected was George Washington. Thereafter, we've been fighting, and so the issue is once individuals are elected, they need to talk about what government actually does for people. And I was glad to hear, you're working with your Republican colleagues in order to deliver those judges that are necessary. In other words, elected officials have some kind of a civic duty to talk about what government can do, and not necessarily put it in the framework of a partisan issue. This is important by way of the whole thing that in the end we should have some kind of a civic religion where we have some kind of faith and trust that the government is looking after some of the needs regardless of partisanship. And so elected officials have a responsibility to speak in terms other than partisanship and look at things other than what's going to happen in the next election.
Let me, first of all, thank you so much for what you do. I've got a daughter here, so we appreciate what you all do here as professors. I actually, when I was in the state legislature, I was the chairman of the subcommittee on appropriations for higher ed. Those were the good old days where 75% of all the new dollars that Texas had would go into education. I understand it's a little different now, but when I was there, I was the author of House Bill 713, which is the Texas grant, which is the largest scholarship in Texas history, and I hope the state legislature protects it. We put money into the Texas Equalization Fund also, and I also did the Senate had passed the bill in 3 days, then got stuck in the House. The sponsor didn't want to carry. I carried it and made some changes and passed the tenure law that we have right now. And talking about politics, dealing with professors in higher ed, but we're able to get all the groups together and pass a tenure law, the tenure law that we have right now. But the reason I say that is because I focus, if you ask me when I was in the state legislature, I did several things. My areas, and notice the poll that I talked, and this poll really hasn't changed, was that I was the author of the largest scholarship in Texas history, the Texas grant. We created a brand new university 4-year in Laredo, Texas A&M International. We put a lot of tuition revenues. In fact, in the 90s, out of the over $1 billion that we did in tuition revenues, there were 2 universities. Most universities would get 3%. 2 universities got a little bit over 10%. Texas A&M International Laredo and UTSA, and we saw how UTSA grew because of the focus that we have. So if you ask me what were the 2 things when I was in the state, and I'm trying to work on this also at the federal level, was the Texas grant, focus on education, and I started the first CHIP program in Texas before it went statewide. We started at the Farias Elementary School in Laredo, and then went, of course, statewide itself. And again, this thing hasn't changed. Education, healthcare, the economy hasn't changed. Might be another one, like I mentioned, law enforcement. I mean, the law enforcement issues of terrorism. Another factor will come in depending what is happening up there. But the reason I'm saying is, how do you build that trust? Addressing the issues that you need to do. One of the things I've done, and we haven't done this in my 12 years as a congressman, is we have and I see my chief of staff over here, Cynthia, she's been with me from the very beginning. Chief of staff is here in San Antonio. We have a neighborhood office at every single city that I represent. And if you go from San Antonio all the way down to the McAllen area, there's a lot of cities, including McMullen and Tilden and McMullen, and focus on those issues. You go to McMullen, create a new clinic there. So you focus on the issues. So we don't wait for people to come in. We go out and go talk to them every single month for the last 12 years. So instead of saying, come to the San Antonio office, come to the Laredo office, come to the Rio Grande office, come to the Mission office, or go all the way to DC, we go out there. You built the trust. You were talking about trust is by talking, but more importantly, by listening. And finally, the last thing is this partisan. A lot of members, and I'll say this, not my good friend here, but I just say this, members in general, Democrats and Republicans, they go to Washington and they ask one question: what does my party want me to do? I mean, if you go and you can answer that question, Then as a Democrat, Democratic Party wants me to vote this way, boom. My Republican Party wants me to vote this way. Then you can send anybody to Washington. You can send anybody to Washington, because if you are afraid to take the hard question, and remember, when I ran the first time as a Democrat, my opponents were not Republicans, they were Democrats. You know why? Because they thought that as a Hispanic, I had to be a liberal, nothing against liberal, you know, I'm very progressive in many ways, education, healthcare, pro-business, and pro-life, pro-gun, Democrat, and I look at the issues itself. As an attorney, I still look at it, you know, just say, here's a bill and go ahead and vote on it. Healthcare law, I support a healthcare law. And now what's happening right now, the two extremes are coming in. Republican Party wants to repeal it. Democratic Party doesn't want to change one word as if it's a perfect law. And it's not a perfect law. We need to make some changes. We need to repeal some parts, but it's something that we need to have for healthcare. So the reason I say that is that there are people, a lot of people that go up to Washington that just ask one question: what does my party want me to do? And if you do that, then you let the extreme parts of both parties dictate what's good for your district. And that's why I always said, we look at the dual track out there, but I run like if I'm a mayor of Tilden, Texas, Floresville, Texas, Pleasanton, Texas, Laredo, Texas, Zapata, Texas, Rio Grande, Roma, Converse, you know, the other cities, you know, the Randolph Air Force Base that I represent over here. You got to do that. But if you're so partisan up there, then you're not going to get the job done. This is why I've said some of my good friends in appropriations, there's 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat in appropriations from Texas. Immigration judges, I get the help from a Republican chairman. The TRIO program that we're adding money, Tom Cole, Oklahoma, Republican. We're working together to add more money into that. John Culbertson, he's helping me to add money where we're saying now, National Science Foundation, you will put $30 million for Hispanic serving programs, universities across. And we're working it together because we're Texans, and like LBJ said, an American first. No, did he say I was a Texan first? No, I'm just kidding. I'm an American, I'm a Texan, I'm a Democrat. And anybody that goes to Washington and puts party before, then I think they're doing a disservice. And I mean that to Democrats and Republicans itself. That's how you build trust.
I'll try to keep it short.
Hey, that was short.
But what I mean though is I want to make sure that for you here we answered the question, right? And the question was, how do you restore trust? Because you feel like there's sort of an atrophy of trust. That trust is leaving, and so what can we do? And I think the congressman is absolutely right that there's a lot that the elected person can do to go outward to do that. I think communication is important. You know, I want to make sure that I'm found, so yeah, I think it's important that people return phone calls and emails and do their own social media and that sort of thing. But more than that, I think that there actually is more, like you have the answer more than we do. Because what happens when you get elected, and this is weird for me because I'm a neighborhood guy, I'm an SEISD guy, you know, right? Arnold, Tafoya, Brack, Jeff, I know you're wondering, is that you get elected and all of a sudden people are nicer to you, right? You get to cut in front of line, you're at dinner and you get a free dinner, or you get offered a free dinner. And I think that people forget that they're the boss, right? They forget that they're the boss. They forget, they think that I don't want to bother you because you're so busy. Well, why am I here? I didn't think I could email you because I was worried that it would just get lost in the shuffle. Well, that's my problem. I didn't want to tweet you because I thought you wouldn't tweet back. Well, I get that, but I'm an employee. And so I think that people forget that they can say, hey, the PTA at Olmos Elementary wants to meet with you. Here are the 4 times they're meeting in the next 3 months. We need you to show up. And they can say, not a staffer, we want you. Or, you know, Trinity Baptist Church wants to have a conversation about healthcare. Here are the Sundays that are available, or whatever day it might be. Show up because we want to talk to you about it. No one, very, very few people do that. Or they give us a pass when we say no. And so then the question has to be, aside from what we do in our respective cities of DC and Austin, why are we here in the first place? And so we have an obligation to people to respond, to show up, and to create an environment where you feel like you know what we're doing to create that trust. I was just saying the other day that if I passed a law having to do with funding of pre-K, this is in Austin, I would challenge anyone here to go and verify if that was true. It's so hard to even get those answers, so it's my responsibility to help you find the answers so you can judge me accordingly. So I think part of it is all the things he's talked about: be accessible, be available, have long office hours, respond through every medium that you've got. But at the same time, if you're not satisfied, then put your foot down and say, I want to have a face-to-face conversation with my representative. Now, granted, it's easier for me to do that in a district that is completely self-contained in Bexar County versus one that is about the size of several states. But obviously, there are ways to make that accessibility work, right? But I really do believe that we are treated with too much reverence as opposed to being treated like employees. You certainly elect us to exercise some independent thought, to sort of do what we think is the right thing to do at the moment, but that certainly doesn't mean that we shouldn't be held accountable by the very people who put us there in the first place. In fact, arguably, that's exactly the way it's supposed to work, right? So I would just say, call us out. And I think it's more telling if we don't show up, right?
I agree with what's been said, but I will also tell you one of the most important lessons that you can teach people, in my view, what I try to teach my son is, when you fall down, you got to get back up. I mean, if you fall off a horse, you got to get back on, right? You can't be afraid of the horse, because then you'll never get back on. And so what happens is, a lot of times, we're disappointed in the people that we elect. And so we don't follow up, right? We had a bad experience, and we don't follow up. And the truth is that, you know, right now, for example, or even in other elections, instead of being disappointed, when we elect people that we really don't want there, that's when our country needs us the most. And yet, I mean, what I love about the Spurs is when they're down and it's the fourth quarter, that's when they play their best basketball. That's when they play absolutely phenomenal basketball. But for us, many times as voters, when we're down and think that we're getting the short end, then that's not when we play our best civic engagement game, right? That's when we give up. And so we've got to find a way to re-engage and to engage more when we're disappointed. I tell you that because, I mean, if you look at public education, when I was in the legislature, this was the argument that I used, because what the legislature did would drive me up the wall. And I'm going to use small numbers because it's just easier to explain, right? So one year, the legislature would cut your budget by $100, right, for education. And everybody would be mad because they cut $100. The next year, the legislature would come back and they would give you $5, right? And everybody would be happy. Or they would, even if they gave you $10, everybody would be happy. Oh, we spent more money on public education. Well, I kind of use sports analogies because I like to watch sports, but if you're thinking about right now, I mean, I'm keeping track of high school and my Longhorns on the college level, okay? So you think about football. If your quarterback gets sacked 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage and you lose 10 yards, right? And then on the next play, your quarterback gains 10 yards. That ain't a first down, right? You're back at the line of scrimmage. And you don't win football games by staying at the line of scrimmage, right? You need first downs. And so as voters, a lot of times we're satisfied because we're back at the line of scrimmage. And we should never be satisfied that we're at the line of scrimmage. We need to hold all of our elected officials accountable. But that means that we got to pay more attention to what's going on, because you can't be bought off by or influenced by. I mean, one of the hardest questions that I have ever had to answer from my little boy, and he was 6 or so years old at the time, when he saw a campaign flyer years ago and was reading it, and it was my opponent's, and Nicolas said, "Dad, is this true?" And I said, "No, Nicolas, it's not true." And he said, "Well, Dad, if it's not true, why do they say it?" And I said, "Well, Nicolas, sometimes in politics, people exaggerate." And Nicolas says, "Dad, but you've taught me that exaggerating is lying." And I said, "Well, okay, yeah, Nicolas, that's true." And he says, "Okay, so now you have to explain to me why you want anything to do with a profession where it's okay for people to lie." And that was a really hard conversation, because I said, "Nicolas, it's not about lying. It's about changing the system and making the system better. That's why I participate, because I want to make it better." But if you ask anybody out there what they think of politics today, they think that everybody lies. They think that no one is honest. And that applies across the board. And you know what? It's up to us to get people that we believe in, that are passionate, that are going to do what we want.
Seems like we're getting ready to close, so let me be real quick with 2 points. One, your vote is your ticket to firing or hiring your elected officials. It's your ticket to respect and dignity, and it's your ticket to accountability. On the question of trust, if it's an elected official, what did they promise last time? Did they deliver? If they didn't deliver, why didn't they deliver? If they went against their word, why was it that they went against their word? Did they compromise on principles, not just tactic? If it's a new person, okay, we try you out, you promise this, did you deliver, or you fire them? But I think that for those of you that are journalists, I ask you to do a couple of things for me today. Make sure you tell people that October 11th is the last day to register to vote for this election cycle. Second, that a parent can register their child and a child can register their parent. It's allowed. There's a rule that allows you to do that. That the school districts have a responsibility and a statute that says they might register voters twice a year, and most of them do not do it. That we're ready to partner with them, especially for this cycle, on this day, I'll tell you in a second, and for the next cycle, because they're supposed to do it twice a year. May 9th is the Willie Velasquez birthday. It's an official day. It's a day that is all celebrated for Lyndon B. Johnson and other folks who helped to build Texas. So May 9th is an important year because most of the kids turn 18 at that point. But October 3rd is very critical. The first date to remember is September 27th. It's a National Voter Registration Day called by the Secretary of State. And Southwest Voter is calling October 3rd the National Willie Velasquez Latino Voter Registration Day, because that's also the day that Willie Velasquez documentary is coming on in PBS. It tells the story about our struggle. It tells a story about how in the 50s and in the 60s, there were signs that said no dogs and no Mexicans. And there were signs that said you cannot vote. And there were barriers that we were fighting that we're still fighting today. It hasn't changed very much. There is a debate at the national level about building walls and racism that is being discussed like I've never seen before. And that's not acceptable. That's part of the accountability. So please vote. Please register to vote. And I ask every single one of you to commit to getting 10 people to register to vote. And then on early vote, which is around the corner, make sure that they cast their vote. And let's fire them or hire them, because su voto es su voz. Gracias.
On that same note, we'd like to go ahead and pose a question in regarding to the voting issues. The voter ID law in Texas, how is that going to impact? We can get 1 million people to register, but if they don't feel empowered to go and vote because of the issues, how is that going to how's that issue going to impact us in Texas?
And with respect to all, this will be our last question because we run out of time, so we can keep the answers short, if y'all don't mind.
Well, no, it's also we sued on this one, right? It's very, very important. The federal law, which is through HAVA, that resulted from the, what do we call those chads? The hanging chads. The 2000 election, there was a lot of conflict, and HAVA created an opportunity for people to be able to present themselves with bills from your utility company to show that that's you. Well, we passed the voter ID law. The courts clearly said it was unconstitutional, but because of the Shelby Amendment that said that now we have to demonstrate that Texas requires pre-clearance. Those of you who don't know what pre-clearance means, it's permission from the Justice Department to change any issues related to elections. Well, today the courts have said that you must fix and allow people to vote if they don't have a voter ID, a photograph. So you can vote with your driver's license, your military information, anything that's an official ID from the government, but you can also bring your bills to utility phone. But if you don't have either one, you can still vote and ask for an affidavit and vote. Please remember, and make sure that if your registration card does not match the address or your name to the IDs that you have, re-register and make sure that they match so that that's not an issue. But that shouldn't be an issue. You can call Maldiv or Southwest Voter if there's an issue at that day, and we will make sure that you vote. And we are at 210-922-0225, and we can be reached at www.svrip.org. And we also have a couple of things for you to think about. We have a campaign called F the Wall, register a Mexican to vote. F the Wall means fight the wall. Gracias.
Just on that note, I think as we all understand it, that voting is very important here in the United States, all the way down to the county level. We would not want to diminish anyone from voting, and it is important that everyone does get out and vote. And if they want to vote, that opportunity is there. We work close with Jackie Callanan here at the Bexar County Election Administration. She does a phenomenal job, and she wants to make sure that every vote gets in there and everything. So if there are issues, we would ask you to contact a given organization like this or the actual Bexar County Election Administration, and with your ID, you're free to vote, and it's a very cherished, one of the last cherished things that we have that we hold private to ourselves. Many times, as I've worked many of the election locations, people don't like to talk to you as they're going in to go vote because they just want to keep that vote inside and keep it very private. Once they cast their vote, they're happy to come out and say, you know, I voted and I voted for so-and-so. But when they're going in, they keep that very close to their heart. So it is an important, one of the last cherished rights that we have that nobody can take away from us. And we think that is, as a Republican Party, one of the most important things that we have here in this country.
Just one last sentence. At some point I was meeting with a church group, and I told the group, the audience, that voting is as sacred and as big an obligation as going to church on Sunday. Somebody eventually talked to the bishop, and then I got word that it wasn't quite that strong, but but it is because we have what historians and political scientists and sociologists call a civic religion. And that is, we have a kind of bond with our community that we are responsible for one another. And this bond with our community involves, at the core, voting for your elected officials. And it's a sacred duty.
And with that, That's correct. Move San Antonio was gracious enough to bring out a table where you can register to vote right outside that door right there. Huge thank you to everyone who came out, who participated. Round of applause for our esteemed panelists. And I believe we still have some breakfast tacos left over. There are a few breakfast tacos left over, some coffee and juice, lots of coffee.
And again, we do
And
want
a
to thank
huge
everybody.
thanks to Margaret here from UIW who helped arrange this.
And we do want to thank everybody for coming out on a Saturday morning. And
Right.
I know there are folks who need to get out to the Texas Tribune Festival too. So again, thank you for coming.
All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for participating sincerely.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything I can do to help you with that little action would be great. My pleasure. Yeah, good. Thank you, Professor. Thanks a lot. You got some great points. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
If you ever want to, please give me a call and come by. We're happy to walk you through. Make sure all the doors are
Good morning. Thank you again, sir.
My pleasure. It really was.